As far as I know, I was the last person to speak with him.
And the last words he said to you were what?
Aaron Hernandez left 3 handwritten suicide notes in his prison cell on the night of April 18, 2017, and made one final phone call to his fiancee. Those are his last words. The notes were addressed to Cheyenne Jenkins Hernandez, their daughter Aviel, and his attorney Jose Baez, and the phone call ended with no goodbye. Here are the last words of Aaron Hernandez. The final phone call. On the evening of April 18, 2017, Aaron Hernandez picked up a prison phone at the Souza Baranowski Correctional Center and called his fiancée Cheyenne Jenkins Hernandez. He also spoke with his daughter. The call lasted until the facility shut down phone access for the night. That was the last time anyone heard Aaron Hernandez speak. Cheyenne later sat down and talked about what happened on that call. She confirmed she was the last person to speak with him. She remembered the conversation ending the way it always did. Nothing about it stood out. He told her the doors were closing and he had to go. She doesn't even think they told each other, "I love you." Just, "Babe, I've got to go. They're closing the doors." That was it. No long goodbye. No moment that felt like a final conversation. Hernandez had been with Cheyenne since they were in school together. They had a child, and his last spoken words to her were about a door closing.
And that was it.
Okay, babe, I got to go. They're closing the doors. There was no, monumental goodbye, no finality in what he was saying.
The interviewer pressed on the point. This was a man who had known this woman since grade school, loved her since middle school, had a child with her. If he knew he was speaking to her for the last time, none of that weight came through.
Yes, it was a normal conversation, which makes me doubt so many things. I just know that the feedback that I was getting from our last talk had nothing to do with any suicidal thoughts.
Cheyenne said she wouldn't have known what suicidal thoughts sounded like anyway, but whatever they sounded like, this wasn't it. To her, the call was completely normal. The interviewer put it in a way that stuck. You look at the absence of what was there, not the presence. There was just nothing that signaled anything. Hours after that phone call ended, sometime during the night, Hernandez jammed his cell door with cardboard to prevent entry, tied a bedsheet to a window grate, and hanged himself. At approximately 3:03 a.m. on April 19, 2017, guards found him hanging in his single cell. He was transported to UMass Leominster Hospital and pronounced dead at 4:07 a.m. The official cause of death was suicide by asphyxia. There were no signs of struggle, but his last words weren't just spoken. When investigators entered his cell, they found 3 handwritten suicide notes left next to an open Bible. The Bible was turned to John 3:16, a verse about eternal life. The words John 3:16 were written in red ink on his forehead and in blood on the cell wall. The 3 notes were addressed to Cheyenne, to their daughter Aviel, and to his attorney Jose Baez. Those notes, combined with that final phone call, are the last words Aaron Hernandez left behind. To understand what those words meant and why he wrote them, you have to understand how he got to that cell in the first place. 5 days before his death, Hernandez had been acquitted of double murder charges in the 2012 killings of Danielle de Abreu and Safiro Furtado. He cried in the courtroom when the verdict was read. Inmates said he was excited afterward, talking about a potential return to football and spending time with his daughter. He did not appear to be a man preparing to die, but he was still serving a life sentence without parole. On April 15, 2015, a jury had found him guilty of the first-degree murder of Odin Lloyd, a semi-professional football player who had been dating the sister of Hernandez's fiancée. The conviction carried an automatic life sentence. He was also found guilty of unlawful possession of a firearm and unlawful possession of ammunition.
Or guilty of murder in the second degree.
Guilty of murder in the first degree.
That was April 2015. 2 years later, Hernandez was dead in his cell with 3 notes on the table. The acquittal in the double murder case hadn't freed him. The life sentence from the Lloyd conviction was still in effect, and his appeal of that conviction was still pending. That pending appeal matters. Under Massachusetts' abatement doctrine, if an inmate dies while their conviction is being appealed, the conviction can be vacated, meaning they are legally considered not guilty. Inmates reportedly told investigators that Hernandez Hernandez had been discussing this doctrine in the weeks before his death. If his conviction was vacated, his family could potentially access financial benefits tied to his NFL contract and estate. One line in his suicide note to Cheyenne would later fuel that speculation: "You're rich." But before we get to the notes themselves, we need to understand the full chain of events: the murder of Odin Lloyd, the mountain of evidence, and the arrest that turned a $40 million NFL star into an inmate serving life without parole. Because the last words Aaron Hernandez wrote don't make sense without the story of how he lost everything. The case that ended everything. The story of Aaron. Hernandez's downfall starts and ends with the night of June 17th, 2013. That was the night Odin Lloyd, a 27-year-old semi-professional football player from Boston, was found dead in an industrial park in North Attleboro, Massachusetts. He had been shot 6 times with a .45 caliber weapon. His body was discovered by a jogger, lying in a field less than a mile from Aaron Hernandez's $1.3 million home. The proximity of the crime scene to the house of a famous NFL tight end turned what might have been a routine homicide investigation into one of the most scrutinized murder cases in American sports history. Lloyd wasn't a stranger to Hernandez. He was dating Shania Jenkins, the sister of Hernandez's fiancee, Cheyenne Jenkins. The two men moved in overlapping circles, attending the same gatherings, connected through the Jenkins sisters. But according to prosecutors, something had gone wrong between them. Their theory was that Hernandez became enraged after Lloyd spoke with people Hernandez had trouble with at a nightclub, and that perceived disloyalty or paranoia about what Lloyd might have said sealed his fate. The investigation moved with startling speed. Within hours of the body being found, detectives began pulling text messages and phone records that linked Lloyd directly to Hernandez on the night of the murder. Lloyd had texted his sister shortly before he was killed with ominous abbreviated messages, telling her he was with NFL and writing "just so you know." Those texts, casual and coded, became critical pieces of evidence. They placed Lloyd in the company of Hernandez in the final hours of his life, and they suggested Lloyd himself may have sensed something was off. Phone records showed that around 2:30 a.m. on June 17th, Hernandez, along with 2 associates, Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace, had picked Lloyd up from his Boston home in a rented silver Nissan Altima. Surveillance cameras from businesses and residential properties tracked the vehicle's movements through the night, creating a digital breadcrumb trail that investigators would later reconstruct in painstaking detail. The car was seen heading toward the industrial park where Lloyd's body was eventually found, and then returning to Hernandez's neighborhood. But the most damaging footage came from inside Hernandez's own home. His personal security camera system captured the group leaving the house and returning without Odin Lloyd. That footage, Hernandez appeared to be holding what investigators believed was a firearm. The timestamp aligned almost perfectly with the estimated time of Lloyd's death. Hernandez's own cameras, installed presumably to protect himself, had recorded what prosecutors would argue was the aftermath of a murder he orchestrated. On June 18th, police executed a search warrant at the home. Inside the rented Nissan Altima, they recovered shell casings that matched the casings found at the crime scene. Near Lloyd's body, investigators had found a chewed-up piece of blue bubblicious gum in a wrapper. DNA analysis linked that gum to Hernandez, matching samples found in his home and car. It was a small, almost absurd detail, a piece of chewing gum, but forensically, it placed Hernandez at or near the scene of the killing. Witness testimony tightened the noose further. Carlos Ortiz, one of the 2 men in the car that night, told police that Hernandez had admitted to shooting Lloyd. Ortiz's account described Hernandez's stated motive. Lloyd had been associating with individuals Hernandez had personal conflicts with, and that association, in Hernandez's mind, constituted an unforgivable betrayal. Cell phone tower data corroborated the timeline, placing Hernandez's phone in the vicinity of the industrial park at the time of the murder. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered troubling signs that Hernandez had attempted to cover his tracks. He had destroyed his cell phone and the hard drive from his home security system in what prosecutors called a deliberate effort to obstruct the investigation. A .45 caliber shell casing was also recovered from a car Hernandez had rented separately, further connecting him to the weapon used in the killing. The murder weapon itself, a .45 caliber Glock, was never found, and its absence would become a central point of contention during the trial. But there was another thread to pull. Prosecutors alleged alleged that Hernandez had asked his fiancée, Shayana Jenkins, to remove a large, heavy box from their basement on the morning of June 18th, the day after the murder. Shayana would later testify that she wrapped the box in a garbage bag, placed it in her sister's car, and dumped it in a random dumpster at a location she claimed she couldn't remember. The smell coming from the box, she said, was skunky. Prosecutors believed that box contained the murder weapon or other critical evidence. Its disappearance meant the gun was never recovered, but the act of disposing of it became evidence of conspiracy in itself. On June 26, 2013, 9 days after Lloyd's body was found, police surrounded Hernandez's North Attleboro home and arrested him. He was let out in handcuffs wearing a white t-shirt. The charges were first-degree murder and 5 weapons-related offenses. He pleaded not guilty. Hours later, the New England Patriots released him from his contract, a deal that had been worth up to $40 million. By 2015, Aaron Hernandez was facing 3 separate murder charges, a mountain of circumstantial and forensic evidence, and the complete destruction of the life he had built. The trial for Odin Lloyd's murder began on January 9, 2015. It lasted months, and on April 15, 2015, the verdict came back. Guilty of first-degree murder by extreme atrocity or cruelty. Guilty of unlawful possession of a firearm. Guilty of unlawful possession of ammunition. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole and transferred to the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, where he would spend the remaining 2 years of his life. The man who had once had everything, fame, money, a family, a future, now had a cell, an appeal, and a pending trial for 2 more murders. It was from that cell, after 2 more years of incarceration, a second trial, an acquittal, and a slow transformation that those around him described as increasingly spiritual and erratic, that Aaron Hernandez sat down with a pen and paper and wrote his last words. The note to Shayana. Of the 3 suicide notes Aaron Hernandez left behind, the one addressed to his fiancée Shayana Jenkins Hernandez was the most detailed, the most emotional, and the most publicly scrutinized. It was a multi-page handwritten letter released as part of a Massachusetts court filing on May 5, 2017, when prosecutors submitted it in their efforts to oppose vacating Hernandez's murder conviction. Every word in it was dissected by the media, legal analysts, and the public, and certain phrases from the letter became some of the most quoted lines in the entire Aaron Hernandez saga. The note begins with the kind of raw, unfiltered declaration that strips away all pretense. Shay, you have always been my soulmate, and I want you to live life and know I'm always with you. It's a sentence that reads like both a love letter and a farewell, the words of a man who has already made his decision and is now trying to soften the impact on the person closest to him. He doesn't ease into it. He doesn't build up to it. He states it plainly, as though clarity in this moment is the only thing he has left to offer. Then comes the line that sparked the most controversy and the most speculation. I told you what was coming indirectly. That single sentence became a flashpoint. What had he told her? When? In what form? Shayana herself has said she didn't interpret anything from their final phone call as a warning or a goodbye. The conversation was normal, mundane even. Babe, gotta run. They're closing the doors. If there were indirect hints, they were so deeply buried in the ordinary rhythm of their communication that she didn't register them. Or perhaps the indirect telling happened earlier, in previous calls, in coded language, in something only the 2 of them would have understood. The note doesn't clarify. It simply asserts that she was told and leaves the rest to interpretation. What follows is a passage that veers sharply into the spiritual and metaphysical territory that had come to define Hernandez's mindset in his final months behind bars. I love you so much and know you are an angel. Literally, we split into 2 to come change the world. This wasn't casual religious language. This was something deeper and more unmoored, the kind of thinking that fellow inmates had observed intensifying in the weeks leading up to his death. Hernandez had become increasingly preoccupied with the Bible, with reincarnation, with the idea of souls moving between planes of existence. One inmate recalled that the last thing Hernandez said to him was, "Remember when you die, your soul gets reincarnated." The note to Shayana reflects that same worldview, the belief that physical death was not an ending, but a transition, and that he and Shayana were somehow 2 halves of a single spiritual entity sent to earth with a purpose. He continued, "Your characteristic is that of a true angel and the definition of God's love. Tell my story fully, but never think anything besides besides how much I love you. The instruction to tell my story fully is notable. It suggests Hernandez was aware that his narrative would be shaped and reshaped by others after his death, by documentaries, by books, by media coverage, and he wanted Cheyenne to be the one who controlled how he was remembered, not as a murderer, not as a cautionary tale, but as someone who loved fiercely and believed he was carrying out a plan bigger than himself. Then the note makes its most debated declaration. This was the Supreme Almighty's plan, not mine. With that sentence, Hernandez reframed his suicide as something ordained, not a choice born of despair, but a destiny decreed by a higher power. It's a statement that divides interpretation cleanly in two. The letter closes with personal instructions and a cryptic reference. He asks Cheyenne to let Avi know how much I love her, Avi being their daughter Avielle. He asks her to look after Jono and Eddie, described as people close to him, and then he writes the line that fueled an entirely separate branch of speculation: "You're rich." That parenthetical has been interpreted by some as a reference to potential financial benefits that would flow to his family if his conviction were vacated after his death. Under the abatement doctrine, a death during an active appeal could erase the conviction, potentially unlocking access to his NFL pension, his estate, or insurance benefits. Inmates had reportedly heard Hernandez discussing this exact legal mechanism in the days before his suicide. Whether "you're rich" was a genuine reference to this strategy or something else entirely, an expression of spiritual wealth, a private joke, a statement about the richness of the love they shared, remains a matter of debate. But in the context of a suicide note written by a man who knew his appeal was pending, the financial interpretation is difficult to dismiss entirely. Cheyenne herself has spoken publicly about the notes and her complicated feelings about them. In a 2020 interview about the Netflix docuseries Killer Inside: The Mind of Aaron Hernandez, she expressed that the note to their daughter felt less personal than she expected. She questioned elements of the notes, the unusual way they were addressed, the signatures, but ultimately accepted them as his final words.
Yes, of course I do. I'd be a cold person to leave someone that had nobody at all.
That loyalty, that refusal to abandon him even after everything, defined Cheyenne's relationship with Hernandez from the very beginning. She had stood by him through the arrest, through the trial, through the conviction. She had testified in his defense, at the cost of her relationship with her own sister. And even after his death, she continued to maintain his innocence. The note to Cheyenne was the longest and most complete window into Hernandez's final state of mind. But he didn't write only to her. He also sat down that night and wrote separately to the person he loved most in the world, his 4-year-old daughter. The notes to Avielle and Jose Baez. The second suicide note Aaron Hernandez left behind was addressed to his daughter, Avielle Jenkins Hernandez. She was 4 years old at the time of his death. The full contents of this letter were not released through court filings like the note to Cheyenne. Instead, they were revealed in Jose Baez's 2018 book Unnecessary Roughness, inside the trial and final days of Aaron Hernandez, giving the public its first detailed look at what a condemned man wanted to say to the child he was leaving behind. The note opens with a promise that carries the unbearable weight of its own impossibility. "Daddy will never leave you. You're always in my heart." It's a sentence written by a man who was, at that very moment, in the process of leaving permanently. The contradiction between the words and the act they preceded is stark, almost jarring. But within the framework of Hernandez's spiritual beliefs, which had grown increasingly elaborate and consuming during his time in prison, the promise made a kind of internal sense. He didn't believe he was disappearing. He believed he was transitioning to a place from which he could still watch over her, still be present in some metaphysical way that transcended the physical limitations of a prison cell or a coffin. The letter elaborates on this idea with language that is equal parts beautiful and deeply unsettling in its detachment from conventional reality. "I'm entering to the timeless realm in which I can enter into any form at any time, because everything that could happen or not happen I see all at once." This is not the language of a traditional religious framework. This is something more expansive, more abstract, a vision of the afterlife as a place of omniscience and omnipresence, where time is not linear and consciousness is not bound by the limitations of a human body. Hernandez is essentially telling his 4-year-old daughter that he is about to become something like a god, able to see all possible outcomes of all possible events, existing in every form simultaneously. He continues with an instruction that reads like a sermon. "Life is eternal. Believe, love, repent, and see me, yourself, in everyone, because that's what the truth is." The merging of identities, see me, yourself, in everyone, echoes the same theme from his letter to Shayana about splitting into two to change the world. The note closes with a line that bridges his spiritual philosophy and his paternal love. "I'll see you all in the heavens, awaiting you all with the same love. Never fear me, but love me with all of you." The phrase "never fear me" is quietly devastating. It implies an awareness, perhaps subconscious, perhaps fully deliberate, that his daughter might one day learn the full scope of what her father did and who he became, and that she might be afraid of the person behind the headlines. He is preemptively asking her not to be. He is asking her to separate the man she giggled with on prison phone calls from the man who was convicted of murder. The bond between Hernandez and Aviel had been, by all accounts, the brightest thread in an otherwise darkening tapestry. Shayana described their daughter as a daddy's girl who lit up during prison visits and phone calls. Shayana found it painful that those private moments, her daughter's giggles, her laughter on prison phone calls, had been made public through the Netflix docuseries. Third and final note was addressed to Hernandez's attorney, Jose Baez, the same lawyer who had famously defended Casey Anthony and who had secured Hernandez's acquittal in the double murder case just 5 days before his death. This letter, also revealed in Baez's book, was tonally different from the other two. Where the note to Shayana was intimate and the note to Aviel was spiritual, the letter to Baez was a peculiar mixture of gratitude, grandiosity, and warning. It opens with context that's initially surprising. "Well, I wrote this letter following my acquittal and wanted to voice how I felt and let some people whose music has been inspirational to me know." The letter includes requests for Baez to contact specific artists, Jay-Z, Meek Mill, Rick Ross, whose music had been meaningful to Hernandez during his time in prison. There's something profoundly human about this detail. A man on the edge of ending his life, taking the time to list the rappers whose songs helped him survive his darkest days and wanting them to know. The personal tribute to Baez is equally striking. "You're not just my attorney, but a very special man with some of the most remarkable God-given talent and abilities I've ever been able to witness and have had by my side." This is a man expressing genuine admiration and affection for someone who, in his mind, had fought for him when almost no one else would. Baez had represented him through a grueling double murder trial and won. In Hernandez's world, a world that had shrunk to the dimensions of a prison cell, that act of professional dedication had taken on a deeply personal significance. But the note shifts dramatically into territory that reveals the more erratic dimensions of Hernandez's thinking. "Do not go back to living while worshiping false idols in which I warned you about. It's time. The Most High put me in this position to educate this world, and this world will know who God is really, really." The intensity of the language, the exclamation points, the capitalization, the warnings about false idols reads like a prophetic declaration. Hernandez isn't just saying goodbye to his lawyer. He's positioning himself as a vessel of divine purpose, someone placed in prison and placed in the moment of death specifically to deliver a message to the world. It's messianic in tone, apocalyptic in urgency. Baez himself described this note as not overtly suicidal in tone. It focused more on appreciation and spiritual instruction than on despair or finality. The closing sentiment echoed the themes from the other two letters. "I'll see you all in heaven." There were initial media reports suggesting a fourth note had been found, one addressed to a rumored prison lover, but Baez debunked this, clarifying that the third note was addressed to him and had been misidentified. 3 notes, 3 recipients, 3 different facets of the same man, the lover, the father, and the believer, all captured in handwriting on the last night of his life. The abatement doctrine and the legacy of his last words. In the months following Aaron Hernandez's death, his brain was donated to the Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy Center at Boston University for examination. The results, announced in September 2017, were staggering. Researchers found that Hernandez had stage 3 CTE, the most severe case they had ever documented in a person under the age of 30. The disease, caused by repeated head trauma sustained during his football career, had left his brain riddled with the tangles of tau protein that characterized the condition at its most advanced. To put the severity in perspective, CTE is measured on a 4-stage scale, and stage 3 is typically found in individuals decades older than Hernandez was at the time of his death. He was 27. His attorney Jose Baez was among the most vocal advocates for understanding Hernandez's actions through the framework of CTE, rather than through speculation about his personal life. When the Netflix docuseries Killer Inside explored various theories about why Hernandez unraveled, including questions about his sexuality, Baez pushed back sharply. abruptly. For Baez, the answer had already been provided by the medical evidence. A man whose brain showed the worst CTE damage ever recorded in someone his age did not need additional theories to explain his suicide. The primary symptom, as Baez framed it, was suicide itself. CTE didn't just contribute to the conditions that made Hernandez violent or impulsive or erratic. At its most severe stage, the disease creates a neurological environment in which the impulse to end one's own life becomes nearly irresistible. The question, in Baez's view, was not why Hernandez killed himself. The question was why anyone was looking for explanations beyond the medical ones already sitting on the table. Hernandez's estate filed a lawsuit against the NFL and the New England Patriots, alleging that they had failed to protect him from the head injuries that caused his CTE. The case was settled in 2019, though the terms were not disclosed. But the CTE diagnosis, as significant as it was, didn't exist in isolation. It intersected with another dimension of Hernandez's death that had enormous financial and legal implications: the abatement doctrine. Under Massachusetts law at the time, when a convicted person dies while their appeal is still active, the conviction can be vacated, essentially erased. Because Hernandez's appeal of his first-degree murder conviction in the Odin Lloyd case was still pending when he died, his conviction was initially vacated posthumously. In the eyes of the law, at least temporarily, Aaron Hernandez was no longer a convicted murderer. This wasn't a technicality buried in obscure legal code. It had tangible, real-world consequences. If the conviction stayed vacated, Hernandez's family, Cheyenne and Aviel, could potentially pursue financial claims against the Patriots, the NFL, or his estate without the murder conviction standing as an obstacle. Inmates had reportedly heard Hernandez discussing the abatement doctrine in the weeks before his death. The "you're rich" notation in his suicide note to Cheyenne fueled speculation that his suicide was, at least in part, a calculated act designed to trigger the doctrine and provide for his family. It's a theory that paints his death not as an impulsive act of despair, but as a final strategic move, the last play of a man who had spent his career finding angles others couldn't see. However, the legal landscape shifted dramatically in 2019. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruled against automatic abatement, reinstating Hernandez's conviction. The court determined that the doctrine should not apply automatically in cases where a defendant dies during appeal, effectively closing the legal loophole that Hernandez may have been counting on. If his suicide had been motivated even partly by the abatement strategy, it had ultimately failed. The legacy of Hernandez's last words exists in this uncomfortable intersection of competing explanations. Were they the sincere outpourings of a man who found God in prison and genuinely believed he was transitioning to a better plane? Were they the neurologically compromised writings of a brain so damaged by CTE that coherent reasoning had become impossible? Were they the calculated final moves of someone who understood the legal system well enough to know that his death could financially benefit his family? Or were they all three at once, the product of a mind in which love, disease, and strategy had become so entangled that they could no longer be separated? Cheyenne has continued to navigate the aftermath with a mixture of grief, loyalty, and frustration. The Netflix docuseries, released in 2020, brought renewed scrutiny to every aspect of Hernandez's life, including his sexuality, which Cheyenne addressed directly in interviews. For Cheyenne, the exploration of Hernandez's sexuality in the documentary was a violation, not because of the subject itself, but because Hernandez wasn't alive to speak for himself. She made her position clear. She would have accepted him regardless. She said she wished he had told her. She would not have loved him any differently. She called it a beautiful thing, not a shameful one, and she wished she had been able to tell him that while he was still alive. The last words of Aaron Hernandez, spoken on the phone, written on paper, scrawled on a cell wall, tell the story of a man who existed at the collision point of extraordinary talent, extraordinary violence, extraordinary disease, and extraordinary love. His suicide notes were discovered next to a Bible open to John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Those were not Hernandez's words, but they were the words he chose to die beside. The notes themselves, 3 letters to the 3 people he loved most, remain his true final statement. To his fiancée, "You're my soulmate. I told you what was coming. Tell my story. You're rich." To his daughter, "Daddy will never leave you. Life is eternal. I'll see you in heaven." To his attorney, "You're a special man. Don't worship false idols. The Most High put me here for a reason." Those were the last words of Aaron Hernandez. Thanks for watching. If you found this video shocking and unbelievable, be sure to check out other similar and amazing videos on the screen. See you in the next video.